Chapter 141. Benjamin's sleek move caught Orissa by surprise. With quick reflexes, she placed both her hands on his chest to block him. Flabbergasted, she stammered, "Why you?" Benjamin peered at her with a suggestive, darkened gaze. Her face radiated a rosebud pink as she blushed away in embarrassment. "You are nervous indeed," said Benjamin. Orissa stared into his eyes, not knowing what to say. She couldn't help but feel nervous since he hugged her suddenly. "Mr. Graham, can you let go of me first?" uttered Orissa. However, Benjamin continued his steely gaze at her. "Why do I find you so familiar?" he asked, seeming to imply something. This made Orissa's heart pound even wilder. With an uneasy smile, she replied, "Is this the way you usually pick women up?" Benjamin heaved a slight sigh and said, "You came to me with a purpose by offering the cheesecake. Why are you acting all innocent now?" Orissa's face grew redder than before. She struggled to free herself from him, but it was futile. In a haughty tone, she glared at him. "Actually, I have something to tell you." What a presumptuous man. He even thinks I'm trying to get near him purposefully. "Oh, please." Benjamin raised his thick eyebrows inquisitively and looked devilish. With his body leaned in close to her, he looked at her seductively. His elongated and upturned eyes were dark and brooding in a captivating gaze. "What is it?" asked Benjamin. Orissa moved back more to distance herself from him. Even then, she could clearly still feel his breath. The tension in the air made it hard for Orissa to focus. With her face all red, she mumbled, "Mr. Graham, can you please make way?" It was hard for her to talk when he came up so close to her. Benjamin noticed she was still red in the face and suddenly released her from his arms. Once he did so, Orissa quickly shifted aside with shady eyes. "Is this your creation?" he asked, with a casual glance at her. "What?" replied Orissa. She looked blankly at him, still in a daze. Amused, Benjamin raised the cheesecake and looked at her. "I'm talking about this." Orissa returned to her senses and became alert. "Well, Edwin made this." Then Benjamin put a mouthful of cheesecake into his mouth. The cheesecake exuberated a sweet and citrusy flavor. With enlarged eyes, Orissa glanced at him in disbelief. She couldn't believe that Benjamin actually liked cheesecakes. As Benjamin savored the cheesecake, she pondered a while before firing off her question. "Well, have you ever wondered?" Orissa started. Benjamin raised his eyes to look at her. That made Orissa pause for a while as she gathered her thoughts about Gavin. "Are you aware that Donna was mean to Gavin?" asked Orissa. "I didn't know in the past," replied Benjamin with a spark in his eyes. In fact, Gavin withheld the truth from everyone. When Orissa noticed the grim expression on his face, she felt slightly better. At least, she was convinced of his love for Gavin. "Well, between your son and that woman, who is more important?" asked Orissa. Benjamin narrowed his eyes and gazed at her firmly. Without answering her, Benjamin asked her instead, "What are you trying to say?" With a doubtful look at Benjamin, Orissa wondered. Is Donna also important in his heart? "Have you ever suspected the relationship between Donna and Gavin?" asked Orissa again. Benjamin continued his steely gaze at her and showed no emotion on his face. To further her point, Orissa cleared her throat. "For instance, Donna may not be Gavin's real mom." Orissa hoped for a reaction from Benjamin, but he continued eating his cheesecake with his head down instead. In fact, he did not seem the least surprised with what he heard. This made Orissa puzzled. Does he already know about this? "So, are you saying you are Gavin's real mom?" Finally, Benjamin raised his head and looked right into Orissa's eyes. Orissa was at a loss for words. She looked into Benjamin's deep gaze and smiled awkwardly. "What do you think? Do you think I look like Gavin's real mom?" asked Orissa with gusto. "Even if there is a resemblance, it doesn't prove your relationship," replied Benjamin with his darkened gaze and low, husky voice. When Orissa realized Benjamin wasn't mad at her, she took the chance and pressed on. "Actually, Gavin is indeed my son." Now, Benjamin sharpened his gaze even more intently and narrowed his upturned eyes. Orissa felt a mounting pressure on her. "What evidence is there to prove that you are Gavin's real mom?" asked Benjamin. After she swallowed a lump in her throat, Orissa said, "If you don't believe me, Gavin and I can do a DNA test for authentication." At that moment, Benjamin had finished the slice of cheesecake and put the empty plate down. Orissa could not believe that he really finished that whole slice. Benjamin took his time to wipe his mouth and slowly moved back to his work desk. "Mr. Graham," Orissa tried to get a reaction from him. She wasn't sure about his take on the matter. Isn't he the least surprised? "All right, I got it." Benjamin swiped a glance at her before he resumed his work. He remained indifferent and paid no more attention to her. Orissa was speechless once again. Chapter 142. Donna also did a DNA test before. It has been proven that she's the biological mother of Gavin. Benjamin looked at her with a darkened gaze. "That's impossible," Orissa blurted. "I am Gavin's biological mother. Donna must have stolen my DNA for her test when I was held captive at that place 5 years ago. It would be a piece of cake for Donna to achieve such an act." "Why are you so sure that Gavin is your son?" asked Benjamin flatly with an unfathomable expression. He didn't seem to believe her at all. Clenching her teeth, Orissa answered, "I gave birth to him, so naturally, he is my son." Figuring that she had nothing to lose, she bellowed, "It was Donna that snatched him away from me." Upon hearing that, Benjamin narrowed his eyes and signaled for Orissa to continue. 6 years ago, not long after I found out I was pregnant, I was taken away and imprisoned in an abandoned building in the suburbs until the end of my pregnancy." When Orissa recalled the feelings of helplessness and fear during that time, her eyes instantly became teary as she choked in tears. "Donna took away my child and even abandoned me in the desert so that I would become food for wild animals. Fortunately, I was rescued by someone. Otherwise, I wouldn't be standing here." Orissa hid the existence of the other children as she balled her hands into fists to suppress the incurred hatred. "Donna had already set me up from the moment I left the room, and she would stop at nothing just to become Benjamin's wife." Shock fleeted across Benjamin's eyes and his expression turned grim upon hearing Orissa's words. If he heard about this in the past, he would never believe that Donna could do such things. However, after he saw her mistreat Gavin and came to realize that his son was not her child, he had no reason to doubt Orissa. "Mr. Graham, you can go and investigate it yourself if you don't believe me. The abandoned building where they held me captive can still be found." Orissa looked at Benjamin and thought that he didn't believe her, so she told him the location of the building. As Benjamin gazed intently at Orissa, his heart ached for her when he saw hatred and agony fill her face. "If you're telling the truth, why didn't you come and look for Gavin throughout these years?" Benjamin felt sad for Gavin. She could have come back earlier. Instead, she only reappeared after 5 years. Gavin had to grow up without motherly love in all those years. Orissa responded with a bitter smile. "Mr. Graham, I would be walking into the lion's den if I came back as a weak and helpless person. Donna wanted to kill me. She will act against me if she sees my return as a threat. Do you think I can survive if I have no one to rely on?" Orissa held back the rage in her heart and hissed, "Although I didn't come back, I never gave up on searching for my child. That was the biggest reason I returned from overseas to work here, but it never crossed my mind that you have my son." When Benjamin heard that Orissa had no one to rely on, his heart sank. He then got closer to her side and asked, "You approached me because of Gavin?" Orissa was stunned by his question. With a frown, she replied, "It was a coincidence. I didn't know you or the father before I returned. I only took a guess after seeing you. That was why I agreed to visit your house in the first place. I was only sure of your identity after I saw Gavin." "Oh," Benjamin responded with an unreadable expression. Orissa raised her eyes to look at him. She was suddenly captivated by his dark eyes. However, what Benjamin said next almost made her blood boil. "Why does it sound like you made that up to approach me?" Orissa gritted her teeth and muttered, "You can authenticate our DNA. If I am not the biological mother of Gavin, you can deal with me however you want, and I will not resist." "Are you sure?" A cunning look flashed through Benjamin's eyes. "Yes," Orissa answered without much thought. She didn't know that he had already gotten the maternity test report. Benjamin scoffed as he turned around and walked towards his desk. He took out the report from the drawer and threw it before Orissa. "Orissa, Take a good look at it. Chapter 143. Orissa stared at Benjamin with a puzzled look. She was curious about what he was trying to show her. After she took the paper from him, her eyes widened as she realized it was a DNA test report. Her pupils dilated when she read the final result of the test. Whose report is this? Orissa was in disbelief. She then felt an ominous premonition. What do you think? Benjamin replied as he looked at her with a half-smile. Orissa's eyes glinted. She shifted her gaze to look at the test result again. This test is of me and Gavin. Impossible. Just when she tried to refute, Benjamin started to speak. This is the maternity test report of you and Gavin. Do you think that I never had my suspicions? However, you can't fool me with your lies. Looking at Benjamin's condemning gaze, Orissa felt aggravated. This test result is fake. Are you doubting me? Benjamin's face darkened upon hearing that. Who just mentioned that if she was proven wrong, I can deal with her however I want. Orissa was dumbstruck. Gavin is truly my son. How can he not be? If I only had one child, I probably would believe this, but I gave birth to quintuplets. Furthermore, Gavin looks exactly like Jasper, Zachary, and Oliver. I couldn't possibly have made a mistake. Benjamin felt a twinge of pleasure as he looked at the stunned woman. Even though you are not the biological mother of Gavin, you seem to get along well with him. Therefore, I'll allow you to live here for a period of time, meanwhile ensuring your safety. However, you are not staying as the mother of Gavin but as a nanny. Upon hearing Benjamin's words, Orissa glared at him in disbelief. Be a nanny of my own child? That is absurd. I don't agree to this. I still have 4 children at home. If I become a nanny here, who will take care of them? Jessie will cry if I'm not around. Benjamin narrowed his eyes. Ruthlessness was well hidden within his stare as he asked, You no longer like my son? Orissa glowered at him. That's impossible. They are all my children. I gave birth to them and they are all my sweethearts. I like Gavin, but I can't be his nanny. I am indeed Gavin's biological mother, and yet he still asks me to be his nanny. What do you want to be, if not a nanny? Benjamin asked while staring at her intently. Orissa's heart skipped a beat when she heard his question. She averted her eyes awkwardly as she answered faintly, I am, in fact, his mom. Not his nanny. Benjamin raised his eyebrows slightly. You want to be Mrs. Graham? Orissa was rendered speechless. I do not. All right. Can this man be less self-absorbed? Does he really think that everyone wants to be his wife? I just want to be Gavin's mom. No, I am his mom, said Orissa with a flushed face. Benjamin's expression darkened. Orissa was clueless about how she got on his wrong side. Her heart trembled fearfully as she looked at the man's cold expression. Even if she wanted to tell him about the presence of the other children, she didn't know how to do so at that moment. It looks like he still has feelings toward Donna. If I tell him the truth about the children, he'll probably think that I'm making another excuse to get close to him. Benjamin tapped his fingers on the desk, and people who knew him could tell he was not in a great mood. Orissa sensed a dangerous aura from his action. Just as she took a few steps back, she tripped over a chair behind and stumbled onto the seat. Benjamin's eyes flickered across her frightful face. He then leaned forward and placed both his hands on the armrests. Domineeringly, he looked down at Orissa and uttered, Playing hard to get will not work on me at all. Orissa was at a loss for words. To rebut him, she blurted, I have a husband. So, there's no reason for me to play hard to get. Benjamin was irritated after hearing that. This woman still won't confess the truth. Instead, she is trying to fool me by making up a man. Let's see how much longer she can put up this act. With that thought, Benjamin held Orissa's chin and asked with a warning tone, Who is your husband? Chapter 144. Orissa's mind went blank for a second as it was a lie she came up with in the spur of the moment. She had no idea who was the person in question. Are they your husband's children? Benjamin asked, a sharp glint in his eyes. Orissa felt guilty. She averted her gaze and answered, yes. Otherwise, as she said that, she felt like wanted to smack her mouth. They are all his children. Why didn't I just tell him the truth? Orissa grew frustrated. Looking at the smirk that appeared across the man's face, a sense of uneasiness arose within her. What does he mean? What is he trying to do? HMPH. Orissa, you're a liar. Benjamin cast a disdainful glare at the woman before him. Orissa's heart skipped a beat. She slapped away Benjamin's hand and rubbed her chin that began to hurt from Benjamin's pinch. She had a fair complexion and would turn red easily if it was pinched even by little strength. Seeing that, Benjamin's eyes flickered. He stared at the red marks on Orissa's chin and wondered had he used too much strength. Mr. Graham, what's with the accusation? Orissa asked with guilt. Benjamin snorted in response. Without saying a word, he began to inch closer toward the woman, causing her to lean back in the chair. His breaths numbed Orissa's senses. You lied. Is it an accusation? Benjamin stared at her as if he could see right through her and all of the secrets she had been keeping. At that moment, an awkward grin spread across Orissa's face. Mr. Graham, I'm telling you the truth, but you don't believe me. What else can I do? Which one is the truth and which one is the lie? Benjamin retorted with a question of his own. All of them are truths. Orissa gulped and replied. Knowing Orissa did not want to admit it, Benjamin stood up and stopped teasing her. I'm going to take a look at Gavin. Orissa immediately bolted toward the entrance of the study as soon as she said that. While looking at the woman who was fleeing with all her might, a grin appeared across Benjamin's face. Orissa was stunned when she saw Gavin waiting outside the study, and she quickly pulled the little boy away. Did you hear that, Gav? Gavin shook his head and said, Mommy, I'm here because I'm afraid that Daddy will bully you. Orissa was touched by his words, and she pinched his nose lovingly. Mommy, have you told Daddy? Looking at her son's expectant eyes, Orissa sighed and shook her head. No, she found it hard to grasp Benjamin's mood. Sometimes, the man would be easy to talk to, but other times, he would be hard to communicate with. Frustrated, Orissa hoisted Gavin into her arms and began making her way upstairs while venting. I told your daddy that you're my son, but he doesn't believe me. Instead, he wants me to be your nanny. I'm your mother. How can I be your nanny? It's my responsibility as a mother to treat my son well and do anything for him. What's the meaning of being a nanny? I can't possibly get paid for fulfilling my duties as a mother. Gavin rolled his eyes. Daddy is so bad. How dare he lie to Mommy? The little boy did not expose his father's scheme, and he comforted Orissa instead. Don't be anxious, Mommy. Daddy will trust you after seeing my brothers. Upon hearing his words, Orissa could not help but sigh. After all, the situation was not as easy as it looked. I think your daddy still trusts Donna. It's better to not let him know now. Gavin blinked his eyes at his mother and refuted, Mommy, Daddy doesn't trust Donna anymore. He hates being tricked by people. At that, Orissa's heart skipped a beat. Will Benjamin kill me if he finds out I hid the children from him? Looking at Orissa's worried expression, Gavin immediately consoled her. Did Daddy hit you just now, Mommy? Orissa looked at her son, a curious expression hanging on her face. Daddy hits people. Gavin shook his head and quickly added, Daddy only hits bad people. He won't hit Mommy. Orissa heaved a sigh of relief, and she brought Gavin into the bathroom for his bath. Let's stop talking about this. Come on, let's have a bath. Gavin was shy. I can bathe myself, Mommy. Go have your bath. It's okay. Let Mommy help you. Orissa could not help feeling guilty toward her son. She did not manage to bathe him while he was young and wanted to make it up to him now. Orissa was glad to see Gavin's sheepish face, and she touched his nose gently. Chapter 145. Are you shy? Mommy will just wash your hair then. Orissa rubbed Gavin's head and relented as she did not want to put her son in a dilemma. Delighted upon hearing that, the little boy squealed in joy, okay. Orissa laughed and let her son lay on her thigh. She proceeded to wet Gavin's hair with a towel and rubbed some shampoo onto his head. As Orissa massaged the little boy's scalp, foam began to form. Mommy is so gentle. Gavin smiled. Daddy is too rough. Orissa was shocked to hear that. Daddy always washes your hair for you. Sometimes. Orissa's mouth curled upward. It was hard to imagine a man like Benjamin giving his son a bath. Are you going to wash your hair later, Mommy? Let me help you. Orissa was pleased to hear Gavin's words. Mommy doesn't want to wash her hair today. I will help Mommy if you want to wash your hair next time. Gavin's face turned slightly reddish. Sure, Orissa agreed with joy. After washing Gavin's hair, she dried his hair with a towel and gave him a blow-dry. Then, she let Gavin take his bath by himself. Go have your bath, Mommy. I can do it myself. Gavin raised his head and reassured his mother. All right. Orissa left and closed the door for her son. Then, she took her bath in the guest room. Edwin was always prepared. Hence, Orissa only realized she did not have any clothes to change into after taking off the set of clothes she was wearing. She wrapped herself in a towel after having her bath and walked toward the wardrobe. There, Orissa saw plenty of new clothes hung in the wardrobe, and all of them were in her size. All of these are mine. Looking at the colorful dresses in the wardrobe, she could not help running her fingers through them while wearing a gleeful expression on her face. Orissa pulled out a dress and a set of underwear and was about to put them on when the door suddenly sprung open. Instinctively, she quickly wrapped the towel around herself once more. Orissa was stunned when she saw Benjamin making his way into the room. Mr. Graham. Unaware that Orissa had just come out of the bath, the man's eyes darkened when his gaze fell on her slender legs that were exposed. Orissa quickly closed her legs and hid her embarrassment. She asked in a loud voice, "What's the matter? Doesn't he know to always knock before entering someone else's room?" Benjamin shifted his gaze toward her face and said, "Take care of Gavin tonight. I have something to attend to." After a brief pause, Orissa responded, "Okay. I get it." Looking at her cautious expression, Benjamin knitted his brows. "You don't have to be so wary of me. I'm not interested in you." "What?" Orissa was enraged by his words, but by the time she came back to her senses, the man had already shut the door and left. She had to take a moment to calm herself down before getting dressed. "Wait a second. Why am I angry? There's no reason for me to be angry at all." Orissa slapped her cheeks gently before making her way toward her son's room. Meanwhile, Gavin was sitting on the bed with his phone, looking as if he was about to call someone. Orissa walked into the room and locked the door. Then, she approached her son. "Who are you calling, Gav?" "Mommy, I want to call my brothers. Gavin missed them dearly. They might be sleeping already. Let Mommy accompany you while you try to fall asleep, all right?" "Okay." Gavin quickly put down his phone and patted the spot next to him excitedly. Upon seeing that, Orissa snuggled up in bed with the little boy and gave him a tight hug. She told Gavin some bedtime stories. Although he had already heard all of the stories before, he was still happy to hear his mother's soft and gentle voice. After some time, Gavin fell asleep. Orissa's heart melted when she saw the little boy in her arms, who had fallen in deep slumber. She lowered her head and placed a gentle peck on his forehead. "Sweet dreams, Gav." Then, she turned off the light and slept. Meanwhile, Benjamin had led his people to the abandoned building where Orissa was locked up in previously. "This building seems to be destroyed not long ago, Mr. Graham." Looking at the ruins in front of him, Ethan said to Benjamin. Benjamin glanced at the compound and narrowed his eyes. "Whose territory is this?" he asked in a stern voice. "This place was intact not long ago, but now it's destroyed. What are they trying to cover up?" Ethan ran a swift investigation and immediately got the answer to Benjamin's question. "It belongs to the York family, and it's under York Corporation." A vicious glare flashed across Benjamin's eyes. Chapter 146. "Well, aren't they quick on their feet?" Benjamin scoffed coldly. A sense of ruthlessness was well hidden within his stare of the ruins. How could Orissa not have known when the place Donna kidnapped her to was one of her own family's properties? From what she said, she probably had no idea that the building belonged to the York family. Look into every detail from 5 years ago. Find out who held Orissa captive, kidnapped the children, and abandoned her in the wasteland. Check every individual involved in this incident and her relationship with the York family. I want to know everything. Benjamin's voice was cold as ice, which sent chills down the spines of everyone around him. Ethan glanced over at Benjamin. He was shocked by how much Benjamin cared for Orissa. "Will our CEO be getting a wife soon?" Benjamin glared at him and exclaimed, "What are you waiting for?" "Yes," Ethan answered hurriedly, then got to work. Benjamin glanced back and narrowed his eyes at the ruins. His gaze was as sharp as ever. After Benjamin left that place, he went straight to the apartment. Yet, he did not go upstairs. He merely stayed in the car and stared at Arissa's home. If he had gone upstairs, he could have seen some of his kids. A bodyguard, who was watching from the darkness, immediately headed over and reported, "Mr. Graham, we've kept watch this whole time. No one has left the building yet." Benjamin's eyes darkened as he nodded. "Carry on. Send me pictures of anyone exiting the building." "Yes, sir." The bodyguard glimpsed over at Benjamin and asked, "Mr. Graham, are you not going upstairs?" "No, make sure to stay hidden." Benjamin was worried that the kids would be startled by his sudden appearance. Therefore, he dispelled all thoughts of visiting them. Moreover, the children should be sound asleep at the time. There was also no need to be in such a rush to see them. He drove back to Yaleview. With the housekeepers fast asleep, the residence was dead silent. Benjamin tiptoed up the stairs and straight to the guest room, but there was no sign of Arissa. Then, he headed for Gavin's bedroom. Yet, the doorknob would not turn. It was locked from the inside. He shot a quick glare at the doorknob before returning to his bedroom. In Gavin's bedroom, Arissa and Gavin were sleeping like babies. At the crack of dawn the next day, Arissa was surprised to wake up with only one child in her arms. She only realized she was at Yaleview after coming to her senses. Gavin was the one by her side. It might have been the trauma of having her kids taken from her 5 years ago, but she would panic if she did not see her children the minute she woke up. Arissa calmed herself down, kissed Gavin, then washed up. After a change of clothes, she left the room to see Benjamin coming out of his bedroom. He was in sportswear, and his gaze was as sharp as ever. Arissa was startled for a second before she quickly greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Graham." "Yeah," firmly answered Benjamin. "Couldn't he have at least greeted me back? It's not like we're at the company. I'm heading down to make Gavin some food." Arissa turned to head down the stairs right after notifying Benjamin. His eye landed on her calves as he followed her. Her snow-white ankles with a dash of pink beguiled him. Benjamin's gaze dimmed. The feeling of someone eyeing her from behind made it uncomfortable for her to even walk. She could sense that Benjamin was following closely behind her. Arissa turned to check but accidentally missed a step instead. Ah! A large hand reached out to grab her wrist and pulled her upward, thus immediately eradicating all possibilities for her to fall. Arissa clung to Benjamin's chest in shock. "Why would you turn around when you're going down the stairs?" he asked rhetorically with a hint of reproval in his husky voice. "Thank you, Mr. Graham," said Arissa awkwardly. She lifted her head, only to be entranced by Benjamin's protruding and alluring Adam's apple. Quickly, Arissa moved aside with a rush of warmth growing in her cheeks. Even though Benjamin was already taller than Arissa, it was more convenient for him to leer over her because he stood a step above her. He stared intensely at her blushing face. His thin lips curved upward into a sly smirk. "There's no need to call me Mr. Graham when we're at home." Chapter 147. Huh. Arissa looked at him in confusion. Her face turned inexplicably redder when her eyes met Benjamin's soulful and enticing eyes. However, the memory of his distasteful words from last night shattered any longing that just sprouted. "Yes, Graham," she nodded as she spoke, then turned to head down the stairs. Benjamin's personable face darkened as he stared at Arissa's back. He grunted softly before heading out for his morning run. Arissa turned her head to catch a quick look. As she saw his cold silhouette head toward the door, the corner of her lips drooped slightly. Just a moment ago, she thought Benjamin was at least slightly interested in her, but it seemed she was overthinking things. Arissa patted her cheeks to make herself come to her senses before going to the kitchen. Edwin greeted her merrily. "Good morning, Miss York." "Good morning, Edwin." Arissa greeted him back with a smile. "Are you up this early because you're hungry, Miss York?" "I just made some oatmeal porridge." Edwin looked at her ardently, and she could sense his friendliness. She smiled and answered, "No, I just want to make something tasty for Gavin." "I'll be troubling you then, Miss York." "Gavin is allergic to flour, so as long as there's no flour in the food, it's okay. Larissa's heart was torn at Edwin's note of caution. She didn't even know about Gavin's allergy. Thank you for the reminder, Edwin. I will keep that in mind. Edwin nodded in reply and assisted her with making breakfast. Mr. Graham prefers a Western-style breakfast. Larissa took a quick pause to smile at Edwin. She was only making breakfast for her son, so she could not care less about Benjamin's preferences. After a few laps, Benjamin's phone vibrated. It was from a bodyguard. Soon, he received several photos. Benjamin scrunched his brows as the pictures depicted Bradley leaving a building with a child. So this man is actually living in her home. His gaze fell upon the little kid, whose skin was as fair as snow and looked identical to Gavin. A gentle look flashed across his eyes as his gaze lingered on the image of the kid for several moments. He ran a few more laps before heading back. The minute Benjamin stepped into the house, the tempting aroma of delicious food swamped him. He headed toward the kitchen to see Larissa in an apron, busy cooking away at the stove. It touched his heart, and the scene in front of him gratified him. What are you making? Benjamin's sudden appearance startled her, making her drop her spoon in the boiling broth. Some of it splashed outward and landed on the back of her hand. Larissa backed away in a hurry, rubbing her hand. He strode to her and pulled her hand over. He asked in a worried tone, "How could you be so careless? Are you hurt?" In a hurry, Larissa pulled her hand back when she felt the warmth of Benjamin's hand. "I'm fine. It's just a little splash." Benjamin glanced at her, then said, "Why are you being so fussy?" The edge of Larissa's lips twitched as she instantly blamed Benjamin. "If it weren't for you popping up like that, I wouldn't have been startled. Doesn't he know how dangerous startling a person can be?" He lifted his brow without even a hint of guilt. "The way I see it, you're just a scaredy cat. I spoke at a normal volume, yet you jumped out of your skin. I was focused on my cooking. I would obviously be startled if you suddenly talked to me out of nowhere." Larissa shot him a look before continuing cooking. Benjamin's gaze fell onto the back of her ears, which were a glistening white. For convenience's sake, Larissa pulled back her hair, exposing the nape of her neck. From Benjamin's point of view, it was seductive and feminine. Larissa glanced to the side to lock eyes with his deep gaze. Her heart skipped a beat. She averted her eyes, thinking he would walk away. Instead, he approached her. She could feel him standing close behind her as she stirred the broth. Her heart raced. "So, what are you making?" Benjamin looked over at the pot, then at Larissa. His hot breath tickled her neck as a tingling sensation pulled at her heartstrings. Chapter 147. Huh. Larissa looked at him in confusion. Her face turned inexplicably redder when her eyes met Benjamin's soulful and enticing eyes. However, the memory of his distasteful words from last night shattered any longing that just sprouted. "Yes, Graham," she nodded as she spoke, then turned to head down the stairs. Benjamin's personable face darkened as he stared at Larissa's back. He grunted softly before heading out for his morning run. Larissa turned her head to catch a quick look. As she saw his cold silhouette head toward the door, the corner of her lips drooped slightly. Just a moment ago, she thought Benjamin was at least slightly interested in her, but it seemed she was overthinking things. Larissa patted her cheeks to make herself come to her senses before going to the kitchen. Edwin greeted her merrily. "Good morning, Miss York." "Good morning, Edwin." Larissa greeted him back with a smile. "Are you up this early because you're hungry, Miss York?" "I just made some oatmeal porridge." Edwin looked at her ardently, and she could sense his friendliness. She smiled and answered, "No, I just want to make something tasty for Gavin." "I'll be troubling you then, Miss York. Gavin is allergic to flour, so as long as there's no flour in the food, it's okay." Larissa's heart was torn at Edwin's note of caution. She didn't even know about Gavin's allergy. "Thank you for the reminder, Edwin. I will keep that in mind." Edwin nodded in reply and assisted her with making breakfast. Mr. Graham prefers a Western-style breakfast. Larissa took a quick pause to smile at Edwin. She was only making breakfast for her son, so she could not care less about Benjamin's preferences. After a few laps, Benjamin's phone vibrated. It was from a bodyguard. Soon, he received several photos. Benjamin scrunched his brows as the pictures depicted Bradley leaving a building with a child. So this man is actually living in her home. His gaze fell upon the little kid, whose skin was as fair as snow and looked identical to Gavin. A gentle look flashed across his eyes as his gaze lingered on the image of the kid for several moments. He ran a few more laps before heading back. The minute Benjamin stepped into the house, the tempting aroma of delicious food swamped him. He headed toward the kitchen to see Arissa in an apron, busy cooking away at the stove. It touched his heart, and the scene in front of him gratified him. "What are you making?" Benjamin's sudden appearance startled her, making her drop her spoon in the boiling broth. Some of it splashed outward and landed on the back of her hand. Arissa backed away in a hurry, rubbing her hand. He strode to her and pulled her hand over. He asked in a worried tone, "How could you be so careless? Are you hurt?" In a hurry, Arissa pulled her hand back when she felt the warmth of Benjamin's hand. "I'm fine. It's just a little splash." Benjamin glanced at her, then said, "Why are you being so fussy?" The edge of Arissa's lips twitched as she instantly blamed Benjamin. "If it weren't for you popping up like that, I wouldn't have been startled." Doesn't he know how dangerous startling a person can be? He lifted his brow without even a hint of guilt. "The way I see it, you're just a scaredy cat. I spoke at a normal volume, yet you jumped out of your skin. I was focused on my cooking. I would obviously be startled if you suddenly talked to me out of nowhere." Arissa shot him a look before continuing. "Cooking." Benjamin's gaze fell onto the back of her ears, which were a glistening white. For convenience's sake, Arissa pulled back her hair, exposing the nape of her neck. From Benjamin's point of view, it was seductive and feminine. Arissa glanced to the side to lock eyes with his deep gaze. Her heart skipped a beat. She averted her eyes, thinking he would walk away. Instead, he approached her. She could feel him standing close behind her as she stirred the broth. Her heart raced. "So, what are you making?" Benjamin looked over at the pot, then at Arissa. His hot breath tickled her neck as a tingling sensation pulled at her heartstrings. Chapter 148. Arissa suppressed her wavering heartbeats and replied as calmly as possible, "Bone broth. He's still growing, so having more of this is good for his growth." The children had their lunches in school, so she could only pour more effort into their breakfasts and dinners. "Bone broth for breakfast?" Benjamin lifted his brow as he asked. The smell was delicious, but he was unsure whether the aroma was from the broth. Arissa countered, "Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. A balanced diet is crucial." Regardless, Benjamin often skipped breakfast. He did not care for it much, just as long as it got the job done. He only had breakfast to keep Gavin company, so he never gave it much thought. Edwin was the one who pulled out all the stops for Gavin's breakfasts. "When will it be done?" He meant that he was hungry and wanted to eat already. Arissa answered without much thought, "It'll take a while." As Benjamin left the kitchen, she let out a sigh of relief and carried on cooking. Once she was done, she asked Edwin for a food container to pack the food in. Edwin asked with a puzzled expression, "Miss York, are you not having it here?" "This is for Gavin to have at lunch." Arissa answered naturally, but she couldn't help but feel a little awkward. She was unsure what Edwin would think of her if he knew she was packing the broth for her other children. Nonetheless, it did not seem excessive to pack them some food since they were Benjamin's children too. "That's a lot. I doubt Gavin can finish it all." Edwin took a look and saw that Arissa had already packed half the broth. "It's okay. He can have it when he's hungry. Having several meals a day is good for his growth," said Arissa casually. Edwin was moved. "You truly dote on Gavin, Miss York." She smiled in response but did not say anything. After setting the packed food aside, she went upstairs to wake Gavin. However, he was already awake and washing up. "Sweetheart, you're up." Arissa walked in to see her son in front of the bathroom sink. She walked over and affectionately combed his hair out of his face with her hands. "Good morning, Mommy." Gavin greeted her with a smile as radiant as the sun. "Morning, sweetheart." She leaned in and gave him a peck on his forehead. Gavin curiously asked, "Mommy, why are you up so early?" "I went to make breakfast." Arissa wiped his face with a dampened towel after he brushed his teeth. Something smells good. Gavin could detect an aromatic scent from Arissa. She lowered her head to get a sniff, and he was right. Sweetheart, I packed an extra large helping for you to share with Zachary and the others in school, said Arissa as she glanced over at the door. Okay, answered Gavin while nodding. She glanced at Gavin and added, I told Edwin that I packed it all for you. Gavin grinned. I know, Mommy, I won't tell anyone. Thank you, sweetheart. Arissa patted his head and brought him out to change his clothes after she was done wiping his face. She changed into a new outfit because her clothes smelled of oil and smoke. Mommy, you're beautiful. Gavin sat waiting at the bedside. He was all dressed up and ready with his little backpack. Arissa chuckled and said, You look great too, sweetheart. She approached him and couldn't help but cuddle and drown him with kisses. Gavin was over the moon with his plump cheeks a beet red. Benjamin was leaning against the door. His lips curved into a slight smile at the sight of a loving mother and the child. Let's head down for breakfast, suggested Arissa. She only noticed Benjamin when she turned around. Arissa merely nodded. Okay, answered Gavin, in her embrace. He wrapped his hands around her neck, eyes beaming with joy. Benjamin noticed Arissa struggling to carry Gavin, so he yelled. Gavin, get down. Gavin pouted at Benjamin's strict manner. Arissa turned to Benjamin and persuaded, I can carry him if it's only for a little while, Graham. She just wanted to hug her son more. Benjamin thinned his lips and dropped the topic there. Chapter 149. How are you this charming, sweetheart? Arissa sang Gavin's praises as she was about to carry him down the stairs. She couldn't resist the urge to pinch his squishy cheeks. Gavin giggled in response. He behaved in a very cutesy manner whenever he was with Arissa. He batted his long eyelashes, which made him appear all the more lovable and adorable. Benjamin's eyes flashed over in Gavin's direction. He was slightly baffled by how different Gavin was in front of Arissa. Come over here. Daddy will carry you down the stairs. He quickly took Gavin into his arms when they reached the top of the stairs. Arissa glanced over at him and felt that, contrary to his usual domineering appearance, Benjamin had a rather considerate side to him. Watch your step, Benjamin warned her with Gavin in one arm and the other on her back. She blushed in embarrassment. Oh, she exclaimed, dropping her head to look at the stairs. Benjamin held onto her with his hand, which could feel how hot her skin was under her thin clothing. She unconsciously picked up her pace, but it did not help put any distance between them. Arissa's cheeks were a rosy red. She snuck a peek at Benjamin but saw that he kept his eyes forward with a cold straight face. She averted her gaze and kept her feelings in check. He's just being nice. Benjamin turned to look at her as they made it down the stairs. He naturally retracted his hand before putting Gavin back down on the floor. Get over there yourself. His deep voice bore a serious tone. Gavin glanced at Benjamin, then headed for the kitchen hand in hand with Arissa. Mommy, let's go have breakfast. Okay. Uncontrollably, Arissa always looked at Gavin with an abundance of love and affection. Benjamin's gaze glinted with emotion as it fell on Arissa's smiling face. While Arissa and Gavin went ahead, she could feel someone staring at her from behind, which made her heart beat faster. However, she didn't catch Benjamin staring at her when she tried to catch a glimpse from the surrounding reflective surfaces. Hence, she thought she was being too sensitive and stopped thinking too deeply about it. Benjamin's gaze moved from her face to her body. She was wearing a white pencil skirt, which accentuated her hourglass figure. Her outfit brought out all her merits. She was seeping with maturity, elegance, and sexual appeal. Arissa paired the white pencil skirt with a mint green satin blouse. It was simple, fashionable, and sensible. Her exposed white calves and delicate ankles seemed to be tempting Benjamin to play with them. His eyes darkened. I want to sit with Mommy. Gavin's voice traveled through the kitchen. Benjamin picked him up and put him in his chair. Arissa let go of Gavin's hand and pulled out a chair. Benjamin took a quick look at her, then sat at the head of the table. Subsequently, she took her seat. Edwin hurriedly served breakfast. A bowl of the broth Arissa cooked was given to both Arissa and Gavin. On the other hand, Edwin served Benjamin Western breakfast. Several other Eastern breakfast dishes were also placed on the dining table. Come, sweetheart. Drink the broth first. Have the others after. Orissa tended to Gavin's breakfast. She stirred the broth to cool it down. Okay. Gavin nodded and scooped a spoonful of the broth. He blew it a few times before drinking it. Yummy. Orissa patted his head with a gentle grin. Meanwhile, Benjamin was frowning at his breakfast that was different from Orissa and Gavin's. He turned to Edwin and instructed him coldly, "Get me a bowl of the broth." Edwin was startled. He looked toward Benjamin and said apologetically, "Mr. Graham, there isn't any left." The folds between his brows tightened. He knew Orissa made a large portion. He glared at Edwin and questioned, "Isn't there a whole pot?" Edwin turned to Orissa awkwardly. She didn't expect Benjamin to want any. Seeing as Edwin was in a difficult position, she explained, "Graham, I thought you didn't like having soup for breakfast, so I packed it all for Gavin to bring to school. If you really want some, Edwin can get you a bowl." With one look, Benjamin instantly knew what Orissa had in mind. She wanted Gavin to bring the broth to school for the other children, didn't she? All she ever thinks about is her children. Did she not think to at least make an extra serving for me? Chapter 150. Mr. Graham, would you like a bowl of soup? Edwin gingerly asked. Benjamin waved his hand in a dismissive manner and replied, "It's fine." The butler glanced at him and hesitated for a second before retreating toward the rear of the room. Orissa shot Benjamin a sideway glance, only to find the latter already staring at her. He had displeasure written across his face. For some reason, she felt a little guilty upon witnessing the look on his face. Do you want to?" "No, I don't." Benjamin snorted before continuing with his breakfast. Orissa's mouth twitched slightly at his words. Gavin darted a glance at Benjamin. He was sitting by Benjamin and cautiously placed his hand under the table, tugging on his father's pants. At that, Benjamin swept a glance at Gavin. "Daddy, do you want some of mine?" Benjamin furrowed his brows as he settled his gaze on Gavin. "Don't talk while you're eating." Gavin was dumbfounded. Seeing that Benjamin was all riled up, Orissa pondered for a moment before abruptly getting up from her seat. "Where are you going?" Benjamin questioned sternly. Nobody dared to cross him with the intimidating aura that he radiated. Orissa curled her lips in dissatisfaction and answered, "I'm heading to the kitchen for a bit." With that, she went to the kitchen. Minutes later, she brought out a steaming bowl of soup. She did not think that Benjamin would want a taste of her soup as well. It was rather unexpected, but Orissa felt a little guilty to have overlooked him like so. After all, she was in his territory. "Mr. Graham, have some soup." Looking at the small wisps of steam rising from the soup, Benjamin's face lightened, and his brows unfurrowed slightly. "Who allowed you to take matters into your own hands? Did I say that I wanted soup?" Benjamin lowered his voice and questioned. Edwin stole a glance at Benjamin, and Orissa could not help feeling annoyed. Does he want soup or not? This is originally for the kids and not him anyways. It's fine with me if he doesn't want it. Fuming, she reached out for the bowl as she said, "I was wrong to assume that you wanted some soup. I sincerely apologize for that. I'm sorry." However, before Orissa could even touch the rim of the bowl, her hand was smacked off. She was rendered speechless by Benjamin's move. A string of curse words played out in her head, but she refrained from voicing them out. Benjamin took a sip of the soup. Fresh out of the pot, it was scorching hot and burned his tongue a little. Nevertheless, he kept a straight face and savored it in his mouth for a bit before swallowing it. It does taste good. It is no wonder that Gavin is full of praises for it. Looking at Benjamin as he drank the soup, Orissa wanted to mock him. As she opened her mouth to speak, she met his dominant stare, and her words ran out. "Take a seat." Orissa rolled her eyes as she sat down to continue her breakfast. Edwin looked on in amazement from the side. "Gav, try this." After Gavin had gulped down the last mouthful of soup, Orissa brought out a chicken pie that had some leaves at the side as garnish. The moment she cut into the chicken pie, the air was instantly filled with a savory scent of food. Benjamin subconsciously glanced over upon catching a whiff of the fragrance. His stomach growled a little at the mouth-watering scent. "It looks delicious. What is this?" Orissa raised her eyes and looked at him questioningly before replying, "This is chicken pie. Have you not tried it before?" Benjamin looked across at Arissa and catching her eye, he raised his eyebrows questioningly. Nope, he admitted honestly. Arissa was stunned by his reply. Chicken pie isn't really considered to be common folk food, though. I thought he would have at least tried it once before. Well, in that case, why don't you give it a try? She took the initiative to hand one over to Benjamin. I'd better pass him one. Otherwise, he might start to create a fuss and nitpick at me again. The hard angles of Benjamin's face softened a touch, just enough for Edwin to notice it, and the latter hurriedly came forward to serve Benjamin. While doing so, he complimented Arissa and exclaimed, Mr. Graham, this smells amazing. It has a really authentic smell. Miss York has done this very well. His gaze narrow and sharp, Benjamin frowned as he zeroed in on Edwin's face and asked, Have you tried it? Met with Benjamin's displeased stare, Edwin hastily explained, I helped to taste test it while it was still cooking. Benjamin's sour look immediately disappeared. Placing the chicken pie onto a plate, Edwin served him the chicken pie after removing the leaves. Arissa looked at the dignified man. It's merely breakfast, yet he eats like he's dining at a high-class restaurant. She dug a spoonful of the chicken pie and brought it to Gavin's mouth. The little boy chuckled and blurted, Mommy, I can eat by myself. All right, after having this mouthful, you can eat by yourself. Arissa smiled dotingly at him. Gavin took a bite, and his eyes immediately lighted up with joy. This is also really delicious.